Hi, everybody. Welcome to my presentation for 10 creative compositions. So this here is to give you some really cool tips on how to elevate your photography. So before we dive in, I'm going to I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. My name is Robin Laurenson. My Instagram handle is @MotherPixels, and I am a landscape and commercial photographer based out of Calgary, Alberta. I've been doing photography since 2016, so I've been at this for about 4 or 5 years now. And I've had the incredible opportunity to work with several partners like Nikon Canada, and Travel Alberta, Tourism Calgary, City of Calgary, Destination Canada, and so many more. So that is just a little bit about me. And I'm going to share with you in the past 4 or 5 years, the different creative compositions that have inspired me to think outside of the box, to bring new and fresh perspectives to a scene. And these skills will just teach you different ways for you to basically use your camera as well and use certain props to elevate your photos. So who should watch this presentation? If you are feeling stuck in a creative rut, so if you're just pointing and shooting and you're looking for fresh perspectives and you're feeling very bored with your particular photography style, if you need creative techniques to bring fresh perspectives to familiar scenes. So if you're used to going to one place over and over and over again, there's only so many compositions that you can do. So hopefully these techniques will give you a new idea for you to approach your scene. If you're looking to have fun with photography. So maybe you are comfortable with what you're doing, but you just want to do something fun, something different. And if you are a beginner photographer and you are experimenting and still trying to find your style and you want to try all different sorts of things and creative techniques, then this is also for you. And finally, if you enjoy challenging yourself and you're constantly wanting to learn new tips and tricks because you just never know. So if you're a landscape photographer and you want to try urban, or you want to try some funky new techniques with your portraits and you just want to challenge yourself, you want to, get out of your comfort zone, then this presentation is for you. So tip number one would be to zoom out. And I was really excited when I first tried this. So here you can see on this image to the right, this is actually like the main one, the one that is not zoomed out, is just a head. And what I did was I went at night and I zoomed out and all the lights came out, and then it looked like there was like a shadow of the head coming out. And I will actually teach you in real time how to do this. So the essential gear that you need for this is you need your DSLR or mirrorless camera. You definitely need a zoom lens. It doesn't have to be a big telephoto zoom, but there does need to be a zoom. It can't be a prime because this effect can only be achieved by turning your zoom ring to have the lights come out at you. Then how do you do this? You set up your camera on a tripod and then you focus on your subject. So what you want to do is you want to zoom in on your subject, right? So you're zoomed in. And then as you have your long exposure set up, so for example, you're doing like a 1 second long exposure, a 2 second long exposure. In this particular photo to the right, I had a 10-second long exposure. So what you want to do is as the exposure is going, you want to zoom out, like very gently, just zoom out of the photo during the duration of the exposure, and then it will create this cool effect like it's coming at you. So for example, here you have a traditional cityscape shot that you take. This was f9, 30 seconds, I believe, and just a very traditional cityscape. This is what happened when I zoomed out during that time. So again, I set up my shot, I focused in on the city, and then as the shutter was open, I gently zoomed out and it created this cool effect with the lights coming towards you. So now I'm actually going to show you this little video that I recorded with just trying this effect with a household item. There were no lights, it's just a household item so that you can actually see how you can try it. So if you want to test this out first at home before you go out and experiment in any scene, you can try this first. So I'm going to show you guys how you can apply this technique to like a very ordinary household item photo if you wanted to make it more artsy and abstract. So here I have my Nikon Z5 and I have my 24 to 50 millimeter lens. And then this is my composition, my subject. And I have a 1 second exposure. I'm going to hit my shutter speed. I'm going to zoom out, and then you're going to see the difference between just taking a regular photo and then zooming out. Okay, and here's the final result. So on the picture to the left is just a regular photo that I would take, and then to the right was the effect that was achieved with zooming out. So you can see, I mean, this of course was just a little regular household item, but it's just something different that you can try. Maybe you can try it with traffic, you can try it in urban lights, maybe you can have lights behind your subject. So if you're doing a portrait, and try the effect to see how the lights come out from behind your subject. And you can have some fun with it. So that's just one of the little fun tips and tricks that you can do with your camera. My creative composition number 2, and it is finding an anchor point in chaos. So what does this mean? It means having one subject that draws the eye. So the anchor to your photo, your subject during a very busy photo. So what I like to do is I like to combine long exposure of movements, but then have my main subject be still. So being like the anchor in chaos is what I like to call it. So basically what this does is it creates a sense of calm, right? So here is a blended photo. I actually took these 2 photos because I didn't feel safe having my dog be so close to a moving train without a leash. So I waited for there to not be a train coming. I took that quick photo of my little dog, and then I combined this photo with a long exposure of the train going by. And so basically the movement is the train, but the actual subject of the photo is my dog. And here is one that I did with a friend of mine. She was pregnant with her first baby. I was at the Cayman Islands, and I just wanted to create all this movement. The clouds were very dramatic. And so I wanted her to be the anchor in the chaos, in the drama. So I set her to be right in the middle of the photo. My exposure was like half a second. And then I just had the waves basically also create like a leading line and motion towards her. So then again, she is the anchor point to all this movement. Then here, I again blended 2 photos. That's just me standing on a rock, but I did a long exposure, 120-second long exposure, because there was very little wind. So the clouds were moving very, very slowly. So I used a 10-stop ND filter to create movement in the sky, some drama in the sky. And then I combined this with a fast shutter speed photo of myself just standing, because there's no way I could stand perfectly still for 120 seconds. And that way I am the anchor point, I am the subject, but then there's all this movement and this drama around me. And this was just a friend of mine who had this beautiful fabric, and she was posing in her bikini in a very windy area in Alberta called Waterton. And so even with a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, the wind was so strong that it was causing all this movement. And actually, this photo was an accident because I didn't intend for the fabric to have this movement. I didn't intend for her hair to have that movement. But I'm like, this actually looks really cool because she is perfectly still. She's perfectly sharp, but then you can appreciate the blurriness of the hair and of the fabric, which is what causes the movement and that cool effect in this photo. My creative composition number 3, and this is one of my favorite ones, very underrated, and it is puddle shots. So I really love creating reflection photos using puddles. You don't need a lake for this. You don't need to go find lakes near you. Sometimes just a little puddle will do. Another thing that you will need for this is a wide angle lens to capture as much of the subject in the reflection. So if you have a wide angle lens, you can actually capture, if in this case, the cityscape And then below the reflection, and also the sky was such a star in that photo to the right that I wanted to feature the sky. So having a wide angle lens allowed me to capture as much of the scene as possible, especially when doing these little reflection shots. Third thing you want to do is you want to get very, very close to the surface of the water, because the closer you get, the closer you can get your camera to the surface of the water, the more even the reflection is going to be. Basically, what I mean is whatever you're seeing at the top, it's basically you're going to see the entire picture at the bottom. You could even flip this photo upside down and you wouldn't know which one was the reflection and which one was the actual photo. And then finally, just a little tip for you not to overlook, because I know it's happened to me, is when you're putting your camera close to the puddle, you might want to grab your camera strap and wrap it around your wrist. Otherwise, it's going to fall in the water. And not only is it going to get super gross and muddy, but you're also going to create ripples on your photo as you're moving around trying to find the perfect angle. And then you're going to have your strap dragging around on the water, making it hard for you to get beautiful still reflections because you're going to be creating ripples in your puddle. Here, I'm going to show you guys the little types of puddles that I'm used to working with. And on the right, you'll be able to see the photo that I got from this video. So you can see right there, that was my puddle. I angled my camera very, very low. And then to the right, you can actually see the final result, which was a very unique perspective of Banff. Here are more photos. Again, these puddles are very small, but when you use a wide angle lens, you give the illusion that it's much bigger than it actually is, and it allowed me to capture a lot more of the scene. Another creative composition that I love is looking for patterns. So looking for patterns in nature, it can be in urban situations. This can be a chance for you to experiment with macro photography. So for example, I was walking around this mountain area and I actually really loved it. It had just rained. So then you can see some of the little raindrops right here on the leaves to the top right corner. But just the patterns of these ferns, of these leaves, I just thought were so beautiful. And something like this would look really great if you were, for example, to print it on a canvas and hang it in your home. And here I was also going for a hike, and I just really loved the contrast because this place had a forest fire. And so all the leaves behind these flowers are, all the trees behind these flowers are dead. They have no branches on them. They have no leaves on them. They're just these sticks, these sad sticks. But then you can see the contrast here with like these flowers that are growing. And I just really love the softness and the pattern that this was creating. Then this is a building in downtown Calgary that has all these cool sculptures, and I just really like the geometric formations here. This is just patterns that you can look for in like an urban type of setting. And then here are patterns that I found in the ice in the winter while I was out shooting at Abraham Lake, which is actually a lake that is very popular for its methane bubbles right here. And then you can see right here to the right are not only the methane bubbles really, don't they only have these really cool circular patterns, but then there's these geometric formations to the right hand side here, like these cracks that are very weird, and they have this leading line that lead to the mountains that I just thought gave it a very unique perspective. Creative composition number 5 is to use a wide angle lens and a foreground. So when you use a wide angle lens, the whole point of the wide angle lens is the distortion of the foreground. So on a crop sensor, that would be a 10 to 20 wide angle. And then on a full frame, you're looking for 14 to 24 millimeter lens. Secondly, you have to get close to that foreground. So it's not just enough to have the foreground in your photo, but you have to get somewhat close to it with your camera. Once you have identified that foreground, you want to make sure that you have a relevant and interesting background. So it has to connect, it has to make sense, because that's the way that you create depth in your photo. And now with a wide angle lens, it will make subjects in the background appear smaller. So that is something to keep in mind. So if you're shooting, for example, flowers in your foreground and your background is a mountain, your mountain will appear to be smaller than it actually is in reality. Another thing to keep in mind is you might want to center your subjects in your frame, because a wide angle lens tends to round the corners and it creates a distortion that might not be very appealing. So I'm going to give you an example here of the distortion of the wide angle lens. And I'm using something that's very familiar to all of us, which, for example, in this case is a picture of my husband and he's pointing. And you can just see, for example, here that this finger appears to be much longer, that like almost as long as his entire arm, which in reality, it wouldn't, right? So your finger is nowhere near the size of your entire arm. And also it looks bigger than his head. And then another example for you here is a photo of my son, who, if you see on the corners, like here, it looks like his forehead is really distorted. And on the photo to the left, it's like the bottom of his face. It's distorting his cheeks, making it look like he has big jowls. And so this is just an example for you to see the distortion that the wide angle lens will have. Now, here are great examples of a wide angle lens. So here on the front, on the left-hand side, you'll see where you see a picture of me wearing that white dress. What I'm using here in the foreground is actually not much bigger than like 1 foot, but it seems like it's like this big rocky formation, this big platform, but they're actually no bigger than a foot in size. And then here on the right hand side on that photo, there's this big rock. But actually that rock is also quite small, but I had my wide angle lens really close to it. And then the mountains in contrast appear to be smaller than the rock, simply because of the effect of the wide angle lens. It enlarges anything that's in the immediate foreground while making items in the distant appear to be smaller than they actually are. But when properly used, you can use these distortions to your advantage to create very unique perspectives. And here is an urban photo. So that bridge, I got underneath that bridge at night and I used my wide angle lens. And as you can see at the very top, it seems like the bridge is really massive in comparison to the actual cityscape. And so it allowed me to create not only a leading line, but a very powerful foreground and a very creative and unique perspective of the city. Creative composition number 6 is, this is not necessarily a creative composition, but it's something that is very important to me because I've gotten my favorite shots from this, and it is to expect the unexpected. So sometimes the best images are the ones that are not planned. So what I like to do is whenever I'm hiking or I'm somewhere, I have my camera set up in aperture priority, because sometimes a moment just happens and I do not have the time to be playing around with my settings. I have a zoom lens with a wide range. So in this case, I had like an 18-300, because sometimes it's just a scene that you want to capture, but sometimes you might want to zoom in on an animal that is doing something super cool. And then, and then also scan your surroundings, wait and observe, drive around, look. When you're walking around, keep your eyes open for opportunities. So for example, here I went on a beautiful hike at Sunshine Village, and the park rangers kept warning us of bears around the area. I never got to see a bear. And so after I finished my hike and I was eating a burger and fries, this crow was flying around eating leftover fries from everybody's plate from the table. So I just grabbed my Zoom camera. I took this photo and then it got featured on Reddit and Bored Panda. And anyways, to date is one of my funnest, most memorable photos. Here are other pictures that I took. So I was driving around Waterton and all these cows were perfectly lined up, all looking at me, which is very rare. It almost looked like they were posing for me. So I took that shot and I loved how it came out. And then here on the right-hand side with all the geese, this, guys, is no Photoshop. I was sitting around by the park. I was doing some street photography and I just sat down and then they all swam towards me. That goose right there just like geese or goose, I don't know how you say it, just jumped up and started posing for me while all those were information. And I was just shooting a bunch of photos. I probably had 100 frames. And this to me was my favorite one just because of the way that they were lined up. My red Converse were in the shot, you know, to add that pop of color. And it just came together so well. And then this on the photo to the left is just your traditional astrophotography shot on a nice day on like a blue sky. And then on the right hand side, they were actually doing some fires for fire control. And I took a shot, and this photo to the right that looks like apocalyptic and fiery performed really well. People really loved it. I really loved it. Again, it offered a very unique perspective just because the conditions were different, and I was prepared to take that shot. Creative composition number 7 is to use light. So I actually like carrying these light sources and lamps, and here I have sparklers. I actually have a bunch of sparklers in my car. And so on the photo on the left, people have taken pictures at Emerald Lake many times. But this time I had my friend basically grab 2 sparklers, and I did a 3-second exposure as she was doing the shape of a heart to bring just something unique and fresh to that very familiar landscape. And then to my photo here with the Northern Lights, there was a guy who was actually posing for his friend who was lighting up the foreground. So I made sure I synced my camera to match when he was standing there. And then I think it just made the photo extra special. If I had just had the Northern Lights with the mountains, it would have been a nice photo, but not as interesting as this one. Now, creative composition number 8 is to find juxtapositions. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to read to you this little fancy term that I have here because it explains it better than I can. And juxtaposition is basically having 2 or more people or objects or even emotions or concepts side by side, and they create a contrast in shapes and lines and colors. And so it's just, I'm going to give you some examples here. You can have juxtapositions and colors. So if you have, for example, like all black and white, but you have a pop of red, that's a juxtaposition. If you have, for example, somebody dressed as a cowboy in an urban setting, that's like a juxtaposition. So here I have one that is a contrast in colors. Again, this is my friend from the Cayman Islands, and the sun was setting, everything was red, and I just wanted to silhouette her with the black. So there's a juxtaposition in the contrast of colors. Then here is one with emotion. So everybody around the birthday boy is really happy. It was his birthday. He's holding his cake. And he was the only one with a sad face. I actually thought it was a really funny photo. It was different than the traditional. They actually printed this and enlarged it for his birthday party because it was so funny and so quirky and so different. And then here you have another one when you have a very cold scene, and then you have a contrast in temperature by having that little cabin be orange and warm. So then you have cold versus hot. And that is also another great example of juxtaposition. So then creative composition number 9 is to do a daytime long exposure. This is one of my favorite things to do, and it's not just applicable to waterfalls, but I'll give you other examples. So what is the essential gear that you need? You need a tripod, you need a 10-stop ND filter, and you need a remote shutter release if you're doing exposure that's longer than 30 seconds. If not, then I recommend that you set a 2-second timer, because what you don't want to do is push down on that shutter and have any camera shake. So when you're pushing down on that shutter, you want to have a 2-second break so that there's absolutely no motion in your photo. There's no blur. So how do you do a daytime long exposure? Well, first of all, you set up your composition on a tripod. Then once you've decided on your subject, like if you have your autofocus and you chose on a subject, you switch it to manual, because once you place a 10-stop ND filter, it will blind your camera. Your camera will not know where to focus. So you want to make sure that you're locking that focus prior to applying the ND filter, or it might not take the photo at all. So once you place the ND filter, again, you either use a 2-second timer to take the shot if it's under 30 seconds, or you will need to use a shutter remote release for exposures that are over 30 seconds. So here's just a regular photo taken at 1/320th of a second. And this is one using a daytime long exposure. So here's just 1/6 of a second. And it's just to create a movement on that train to make it look powerful and fast. And it just gives you a different perspective. Then here it is just a basic traditional nice photo of the three sisters in Canmore. And my shutter speed there was 1/13th of a second. And then here I did a shutter speed of 115 seconds, and I created that motion in the clouds, those trails, which also created a leading line. And then here I used it with traffic. I just went down to like 1/5 and 1/4 of a second to create that movement. Instead of getting light trails, the sun was still setting, but I still wanted to create some motion in the photo. So I did that with the vehicles. And then last but not least, my creative composition number 10 is to use a starburst effect. And you can achieve this by shooting at f/16 and above in most lenses. So here you see the difference to the photo on the left. I just shot at f/8, and then to the photo on the right, I shot at f/18, creating that super cool sun star. Another thing to keep in mind is that the number of blades on your lens will give you different sun stars. So if you have 8 blades, you'll get 8 rays. So even number of blades will give you that exact same number of rays. But if you have an odd number of blades, so for example, you have 9 blades, it'll actually give you double the number of rays. So if you have 9 blades, it'll give you 18 rays. And here I just wanted to share with you an example of how you can also use this in portrait photography with this couple. One was just a regular photo. The other one, I created the sun star effect. So for a quick recap, I know I threw a lot of information at you today. Here are the 10 compositional ideas that I discussed. One is to zoom out during a long exposure. Another one is to have an anchor point in chaos, to shoot puddlegrams, to look for patterns, to use a wide angle lens and find an interesting foreground, to always be prepared for the unexpected. Walk around with your camera, have a good zoom lens on there, shoot an aperture priority, play with light, carry lanterns, carry lights, carry, all sorts of light in your car. I can't think of the sparklers. That's the word I was missing. Do juxtapositions, find things that are contrasting. So don't ever expect these to be perfect. If you find, for example, a bunch of leaves and one of them is like a yellow leaf or an orange leaf, then take that photo. Play with daytime long exposures, invest in a good ND filter so that you can get those effects during the day. And then finally, do some sun star effects if you are shooting out in a bright sunny day. So I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I hope that this inspires you to go out and think of your camera and all the different things that you can do with it. And I can't wait to see how this inspires you guys. If you do, please feel free to reach out and share what you've shot and have fun shooting. This is what it's all about. It's about being creative. It's about pushing boundaries. It's about getting outside of your comfort zone, about learning. And that is the only way that you'll truly get better. Thank you.